I guess it's just hard looking over at your son and realizing you're talking to a man who doesn't need his father's advice anymore.
Never doubt that just as you are a part of us, we will always be a part of you.
I told you in the helicopter that you were destined for a great future. That's why I've been so hard on you, trained you so relentlessly.
Clark is the most amazing person I've ever met, and your guidance helped make him into the man he is.
In psychology, a lot of people feel that the person that you become is deterministic, meaning that there are people who irrevocably shape you, and that you can't escape that part of your personality. That part is determined for you.
You're a product of your own environment, aren't we all?
A man can't deny his true nature, can he, Legs?
What the father does is provide the wisdom and the guidance for the hero to set off on his journey.
It's one of the most important relationships that exists, a father and a son.
Jor-El, Jonathan, and Lionel are all these father figures, but they're different types of father figures.
For Clark, he has these two very different father figures. He has the Kryptonian Jor-El and the human Jonathan Kent.
The way we've kind of referred to it here is if Jor-El was the father, Jonathan was the dad.
I am Jor-El, the true father of Kal-El.
I am his father. I raised him.
It's just two different parenting styles that created a lot of conflict for Clark over the years.
And we get to see him go through the struggle of taking those forces that have shaped him and trying to make sense of that and to step into his own person.
And that's the reason that we decided to basically shape this final season to be about the influences of Jor-El, Jonathan, and Lionel on their sons. I think what really helped Smallville launch in that very first season was the idea that not only did Martha and Jonathan kind of choose Clark and Clark chose them, but that they were the parents we all would choose.
I can't tell you how many people have come up with tears in their eyes, big guys, saying, if I could have one thing, it would be to have the relationship with my dad that you have with Clark.
Son, I am happy when you wake up in the morning.
For me, Jonathan has always been sort of the moral center of our series.
Chores, Clark. Work keeps a man honest. Got to protect the things you worked hard to build.
Jonathan made Clark more accountable for himself.
Clark needed Jonathan's experience and love. He needed a mentor.
He wasn't perfect, but he was helping Clark towards being perfect.
A big thing that Jonathan gives Clark is the permission, the ability, the confidence to go out and make a choice and have it be wrong and have that be okay.
There's nothing you could have done. Nothing.
Clark needs to know that human emotions, the human condition, is positive. Jonathan provides those emotions. More importantly, he and Martha, I think together, provide the love and the care.
What I loved was that Schneider didn't hold back from touching Clark, and he was an affectionate father. They were two very manly men, but they also had a very physical affection for each other, and I think it was a really important thing to show, especially since Clark literally physically couldn't touch his own father.
Welcome home, my son.
Home? I wanted to see it that way, Jor-El. I wanted to learn more about my family, about my destiny. And then you tore it all away.
Jor-El is the sort of antithesis of Jonathan.
Jor-El is sometimes distant, sometimes cold, sometimes more scientific.
He only speaks to the logical mind. He doesn't speak to the soul or the spirit. Jonathan feeds that spirit with encouragement and talk about what Clark could be, not what he is right now. Jor-El again and again criticizes Clark for what he is right now, which is that he has not fulfilled upon his destiny to become Superman.
Don't be too quick to dismiss what Jor-El has to offer you, Kal-El.
Trust me, I can live without constant lectures and mind games.
Jor-El is an interesting father figure because you can't see him, and oddly, that's one of the father figures that a lot of people have is a father who's always working, or a father who may be divorced or gone or even passed away. And so Jor-El really, I think, represents what the spirit of a father brings to somebody and how they learn and grow through this disembodied presence.
You call me your son. You treat me like your enemy.
if ever he was frustrated with his own father, he got to see how much more horrifically Lex had it.
Helping those who refuse to help themselves is a waste of time and money, son. Isn't that what the old Lionel Luthor used to say?
You know, the twin sons of different fathers philosophy is something that I think has kind of come to fruition as far as Clark and Lex is concerned. And their closeness and their sense of discovery have gone in very different directions, but there are a lot of similarities in both of their growth patterns.
One of the things that handicapped Lex was his father figure, who he had to look at as an example. The avarice, the greed, the lack of compassion that he had, he wanted to see Lex pick up those traits as well.
He must be rubbing off on me.
The way he pushed Lex and motivated Lex and those twists and turns, you can understand how Lex became who he became. And so you didn't fault Lex for being that guy, because we understood why he was that way.
There wasn't a lot of love and affection, so when you don't have that, you're just done. You're lost. It's unfortunate.
I would say the love Lionel had for Lex was more of a psychotic love than even a tough love.
John Glover would disagree. He'd say,
He loved Lex. He was a great father. He was just misunderstood.
You know, you say, is he a good father? I mean, there's somebody who gives his son shock treatment to strengthen him. I mean, some people would say that maybe is not good fathering. But I tried to justify it by saying this was going to make my son stronger.
What's interesting to me about Lionel's character is that he, as much as he has sort of an evil, dark side to him, there's always a part of him that really believes that he's doing the right thing.
That was the beauty of Lionel. He could justify it all.
Lex loved his father like everybody loves their father. You want a relationship with your father, but it wasn't there. It was impossible. Lionel made it very difficult on him.
I always found that his bond with Lex, although strange and morbid, it was strong, and he really cared about his son, and you know you could see that.
But I beg to differ. I think Lionel was an awful mean daddy. He was.
Whenever I got a scene or something that I didn't understand or didn't know how to crack, I just would go, more love, more love. That'll get me through it.
Do it. Again.
Gonna shock him again? I love him more. This'll help him even get better. If we give him 2 jolts of electricity to the brain. Yes. Go, son, I love you. Again.
In a way, when Lucifer says to an individual, be like me, you hear the echo of that in Lionel saying to Lex, be like me, I will mold you in my image.
We're Luthers.
He, more than Jor-El and Jonathan Kent, wants a son in his own image.
He is an example of somebody who's trying to force and create the son that he wants rather than supporting and nurturing the son.
I think Lionel Luthor kind of embodies that idea that for you to live up to the values and what I want and think a son should be, you almost have to defeat me because I'm not going to stop testing you or challenging you.
You're gonna take me on, son. You're gonna have to bring your game up to a whole different level. You know, there are those parents who don't want their offspring to overcome them. But with Lex, there was never a chance of that.
Lex is struggling to break away, really significantly break away from Lionel. And it's hard. It's hard for Lex to do that.
You're not my enemy. You're my son.
I never saw the distinction.
The only way, ultimately, that he is able to break away is by killing Lionel.
I was raised in your shadow. Now you're gonna die in mine.
When he dies, when Lex kills him, you almost see this look of resignation.
He was anticipating this from Lex. He really was, because it's almost like he's got a smile on his face. He's not shocked. If anything, it might be, well, you've finally proven you're a Luthor. You know, you've become that ruthless. Good for you.
That was it. There was no turning back. That was the ultimate dark side. He had changed. It was the Darth Vader moment, you know? Lex grew up just like his dad. Maybe that's what Lionel wanted, but it came back to haunt him.
I am the villain of the story.
What's different between Lex and Clark is that with both Jonathan and Jor-El, they wanted Clark to be greater than them, and they weren't afraid of that, and they wanted Clark to surpass them rather than just be them or live up to them.
I know my fate! To be a symbol of hope for them.
I told you to rule with strength, but you chose the martyr's path. What makes you think you deserve a second chance?
I can do it.
We have a misrepresentation, I think, of Jor-El as just the voice. If it's just a voice, you're never going to see the human side.
When he is the disembodied voice in the fortress, he does seem to have a sterner quality to them. However, when he appears in his human form, he is much warmer. He is a character you could love.
He must have known what it would mean to me to meet my real father. To speak to an actual person and not just some voice in the Arctic.
To give him, a vehicle to express his emotions with obviously was very desirable.
Jor-El is basically saying, oh my God, I need to do something. I really need to do something to show Clark that you have such a horrible misrepresentation of me here.
And that's when you see that tape of Jor-El and Lara.
The ship I designed to carry you to your destiny can only hold one Kryptonian. One who has so much potential. So unlike your father.
He never really saw Jor-El in the flesh, not the real Jor-El.
And he really cared about his son, and you could see that. And so that's what's interesting to me about him crossing over into this world. He does really care about Clark.
It's wonderful that Jor-El is getting a little more human, or I think you could argue that he's seeing the necessity of appearing to become a little more human so that he can deal with his child that has special abilities because he has the human part.
And so to see him in his pain and anguish, and that he was a loving parent, I think, I thought it was very fulfilling.
And that's when I think ultimately Clark realizes, I now see Jor-El differently. Now I can go ahead and become the man I'm destined to be, but I can freely make that choice.
You were right, Dad. I never stopped blaming myself for what happened to you. It was a way not to have to let go. That's exactly what I have to do to move on. Even though Jonathan had passed a few seasons ago, he's still very much a part of Clark's everyday life.
He becomes this spectral, wise individual that really guides Clark in a very spiritual type of way.
At the end of Lazarus, we see Clark really reconcile his relationship with Jonathan. And my guess is that maybe Clark didn't even know there was anything to reconcile.
Sometimes I think it would be easier if you were here.
Jonathan suddenly represented the past and baggage in a way that Clark had to get over the fact that you don't just carry it around with you, you don't just cut it out, you embrace it as just a part of life.
We're all confronted with trials, son. But the true measure of a man is how he chooses to react in the face of those trials.
It was very important for Clark to hear that.
Jonathan explains to Clark, you know what, son, you've taken these things from me and I couldn't be more proud of you, but you have to keep going on your own way now. You have to understand that I've shaped who you are, but I don't need to determine what you do. You're gonna go on and be better than me.
And I think that Clark having to come to grips with that was something that was very powerful.
It's not going to be easy, son. But I have faith in you.
He wants Clark to be able to accept his destiny. In a way, Jonathan sends Clark into the world to be Superman, much more than Jor-El sent Clark to the Earth to be Superman.
I haven't grown into the man you raised me to be.
No, you haven't. You are so much more than that. And I'm so proud of you, Clark.
You've made great progress, my son. You've grown up, Kal-El. Your trials have matured you.
My trials are not over, Jor-El.
Father figures absolutely determine who you are, but they don't have to dictate what you do.
Whether you take the advice of your father or not is something that everybody can tap into, and I think that's why the show lasted, in part, as long as it did.
To move on, you can't remain a child. You have to leave your parents.
I think Superman is only who he is because of something that we tried to put a little bit on the nose in the final interaction with Jor-El, which is, and the final interaction with Jonathan, actually, which is, I can only be who I am because I'm the sum of both of you, and I'm literally half of both. I mean, I'm one half nurture, one half nature of both worlds.
And it's those two balances, I think, that where Clark's had to deal with who he is. Is he more like Jor-El? Is he more like Jonathan? And I think what we find out toward the end is that Clark has to figure out who he is himself, and that he doesn't have to be anyone else.
There is a future in which neither Jonathan nor Jor-El can guide him.
He has to leave those fathers behind. It's imperative that he does that he becomes his own man.
The flight is a powerful aspect of being released from those burdens, and Clark can only fly when he has resolved those burdens.
I don't believe Clark needs to leave his fathers. I think he needs to accept what they've given him and see the road ahead that he has to forge on his own without completely cutting the ties to both fathers.
It's finding that within himself, which I think will help him move on to being who we all know he's going to be.
We are confident you will become Earth's greatest savior.
We knew we wanted both Jonathan and Jor-El to send Clark off.
Because what a perfect way to end the show, to have two dads putting the cape on him and then stepping back. Two fathers, one from Krypton and one from Kansas.
The most exciting thing was shooting the last scene.
It was just a nice melding of both fathers, and it was kind of nice to have both fathers handing that over.
Always hold on to Smallville.
We are wrapping up Clark Kent. It's not necessarily the birth of Superman. It's the end of Clark Kent.
The whole point of the finale is really about embracing both worlds that Clark is from, and that he, unlike Jor-El or even Jonathan, is the only person who's of both worlds who can move forward to be Superman.